peak.
The latest data show another rise in COVID.
Hello and welcome to In the News Right Now. I'm Gareth Ike.
And I'm Leilani Dowding. Every week we'll be taking the breaking news stories and putting them to our ever-changing panel of guests.
On the show this week we're joined by East Points West founder and political commentator James Melville, Rebel News journalist Lewis Brackpool and relationship expert Kezia Noble. Welcome to the show. How is everyone?
Very well.
Good.
How are you?
Thanks. Very well.
Before we start the discussion, Leilani, let's see what the news stories are this week.
The cost of lockdown crisis continues as we see the Telegraph headline, the energy bill at Tom Kerridge's pub to leap from £60,000 to £420,000. Celebrity chef warns that the hospitality sector faces terrifying and scary landscape as owners say they may close over Christmas.
Meanwhile, the Daily Fetch reports Russian gas company posts record profits despite Western sanctions. Russia's state-owned gas company Gazprom posted those record profits despite the Western sanctions in the wake of the war with Ukraine.
But things could be looking up with a great tip from Boris. On the boil, reports The Sun, Boris Johnson says a new £20 kettle will cut annual electric bills by £10. Great!
Wow. Sticking with Boris and the Russia-Ukraine situation, Zero Henge goes with the headline, Western allies led by UK's Johnson sabotage tentative Ukraine-Russia peace deal back in April. So are we in a war that we didn't need to be in?
And could another conspiracy theory be coming true? The Express front page says millions facing hardship with the end of cash in 5 years.
And finally, Biden's speech. Biden shocks viewers with hellish red background in polarising speech, reports Fox News. So plenty to be getting into. Let's start with the cost of living crisis. James, how is this going to play out this winter in your view?
To be blunt about it, it's going to get worse. I mean, we've had the government who've known about the escalating cost of living crisis now for most of this year. They've effectively had the summer off with some of our leaders with their trotters up on Mediterranean beaches and a rather grubby leadership contest that seems to be sort of the worst elements of candidates from The Apprentice. It's gone on for weeks and weeks and weeks. So we're at a stage now with this week we have a change in Prime Minister, but nothing's actually been done apart from empty rhetoric. Meanwhile, we're facing, in particular, an escalation on energy prices that by the time we get through to January, not just households will be feeling the pinch, but a lot of businesses will be going under because it's just not sustainable. But the problem I've got is, now this crisis has come from a number of different sources. You can join the dots in a number of different places. But fundamentally, we pay our governments to try and avoid the crisis and get ahead of a crisis rather than being asleep at the wheel. And considering we've known about this for months, we've then had a leadership contest, we don't have any solutions. And yet they will tell us over the winter that we need to know our place. We need to turn down the heating, possibly if there's any rationing, put another jumper on, buy a new kettle. But meanwhile, they've had weeks and weeks and weeks of not getting on top of this. And I don't think Liz Truss is going to make much difference. It's just the next in a conveyor belt of mediocre, you could say, placed politicians who don't come up with solutions for the greater good. They're more concerned effectively to appeal to a certain ring fence of corporates rather than actually the people they're paid to represent us, the people. I think the crisis is going to get much, much worse. And I think some of the stories from a human interest point of view are going to be very, very tragic over the next few months, largely because the government is sat basically doing nothing.
Lewis, you travel a lot with Rebel News. You've just come back from the Netherlands, where it's kind of happening there as well, isn't it? Where there's obviously seems to be an attack on the population there. It's farming. Is it worse in Britain, do you think, or are you seeing horror stories across Europe as well?
Well, speaking to a few people that I met on the ground, they're actually phoning to see how we're getting on and if everything's okay, because they've seen a lot of the headlines recently. So I think Europe in general is going down this horrible, dark route. I mean, let's be honest. Let's be clear with this. This isn't a cost of living crisis. This is a cost of lockdown crisis, eco-fanaticism across Europe and many others. And there's lots the government can do to ease this, but whether they do it is a completely different story. I mean, for a start, we could stop sending or pledging millions, or if now billions of dollars to a war, or pounds to a war that now seems to be almost becoming pointless now, because what we're seeing in the future with possible deals and whatnot, we're obviously seeing the sanctions hurting ordinary people more than oligarchs. I mean, the government can cut VAT, they can cut green levies like carbon taxes, and we could take advantage of fracking, or even take advantage of the North Sea. But we don't seem to be doing this. We don't seem to be doing anything. So it's very strange, because like you mentioned with the farmers and the crisis they're going through in the Netherlands, this is happening across Europe. I mean, it's going to be happening in Ireland in regards to the farmers. We know about the farmers in Britain being basically trying to be forced out with a paycheck from this government. And where does it end? Where does the line sort of draw? So yeah, it's looking, unfortunately, like dark times, not just in Britain, but for Europe in general.
Kezia, as a relationship expert, obviously, I don't know about you, Leilani, but during like lockdown and stuff, I had lots of friends that relationships ended, because of the added stress of being with each other in a house constantly. And I guess also you'd have someone that would be maybe a bit of a branch Covidian, the other person's like, no, I'm not wearing a mask, and it kind of causes issues. Have you seen the added stress of this cost of living crisis affecting relationships at all?
Yeah, I have. A lot of people now are staying in toxic, unhealthy relationships just because they're scared of being alone. They can share the bills of somebody else. And that's actually been happening for quite some time, because of things like high rents, stuff like that. The cost of living actually has been high for a long time for people who rent. A lot of people who are homeowners forget that. And during lockdown, a lot of people also were very scared of being alone. And they were just, found that they were trapped in these unhappy, unhealthy relationships. So I've definitely seen that. And obviously it's like getting harder now to meet new people, because, they're trying to force everybody now onto apps. They want to close down nightclubs. They want to close down pubs. They want to close down meeting places. I think that's the agenda, personally. I think that they want to close down small businesses, but especially meeting places. Because they want to control people. They want people to find love through dating apps, so they can control it through an algorithm, rather than meeting people organically, naturally, like they used to. But I might be going off on a tangent there.
You know what, I hadn't actually thought of that, the fact that people might stay together because of the financial hardships, because a lot of the time they say that arguments can come from financial stresses and stuff being put on, or people, one partner spending money where they don't think the other partner should be, or such. So, that's really interesting about people staying together for.
Well, yeah, because I suppose if you're leaving a relationship, that's a leap, isn't it? If I'm like, I'm leaving the house, I've got to start off on my own. Yeah, so it's a more risky time to do that, isn't it? I hadn't actually thought about that, because that's a really good point.
And James, I know your dad lives in a farm. How's that affecting people? Because I think that people in farming, or even though it's their house and they live there, they're now under a commercial rate as well. Is that correct?
Yeah, I think it's different. The farming industry has been largely ignored and sort of decimated by sort of stealth for a number of different years. But you see what's going on in the Netherlands, and it's spreading across Europe, and it's now in Canada because of the nitrogen suppression, cutting it by 30%, which effectively is a knock-on account with farmers' yields, so it's restricted trade. And rightly so, the farmers are protesting about this, because basically they're being sort of cut off in terms of their ability to supply and generate their own wealth. But there's a number of different components alongside that. If you look at farm, the operating costs of a farm are enormous, and that includes things like the purchasing of feed, fertilizer, and also energy. Now, that energy is obviously coming through two things, through fuel, but also heating in terms of aspects of livestock as well. So it's a perfect storm for the farming industry. Now, my concern with our media at the moment is that there's understandably a lot of focus on the cost of living crisis for households, but not as much coverage about the cost of living crisis for business, in particular energy costs, which is going to be the real focus over the next few months. Any company, whether it's hospitality, aviation, farming, construction, manufacturing, leisure industry, actually a lot of the same industries that were decimated over the lockdown era with COVID, they're the ones that are going to be hammered through these extortionate energy prices. A question that needs to be asked is twofold with this. One, why has this happened? And secondly, what are the government going to do about this? It's probably too late. There's already reports, as you touched on, of businesses that are already feeling the pinch, extortionate increases in energy bills, and it's only going to get worse. And then you've got a knock-on effect where it becomes like a Mobius loop problem. Because when it gets worse in terms of prices, jobs then get lost. And then the supply companies to those businesses get cut in terms of their contracts. So it becomes almost like a credit crunch and an unemployment crisis. We're only at the start of this thing, and I dread to think where we're going to be at come January, because it feels like the horse has bolted on this crisis. And yet we've got governments, either by accident or by design, I think it's a bit of both, that have allowed this crisis to happen. And we're about to walk into what I think will be probably the biggest economic catastrophe of our lifetimes, with at the moment no proper resolution to this.
Oh, I think you're absolutely right. It's a good point you make in terms of the businesses, because people's way of life, you know, like we spoke about it on last week's Right Now show, where you kind of, you know, where you met your partner or where you go and meet the lads for a pint or whatever, you know, those businesses are gone. And so the people that work for those businesses are sacked, but they've still got to pay these energy prices. And it is interesting because Kezia made a good point when she was saying about it's where people meet. And everywhere you've listed there, James, and I would include probably gyms in that, are where people go and, you know, you go and work out in theory or chat by the water cooler. But it's also like a social interaction, isn't it? And that's now being taken away from us. Yeah, but
I mean, it's the same aspects as COVID in a lot of ways, whereby effectively the industries whereby we are entertaining ourselves or socializing. You know, we work hard, we earn our money, but we want to play as well. You know, whether it's in a pub or a restaurant or a hotel or travel overseas, holiday, keep fit. You know, we went through a period whereby the gyms were shut and the pools were shut, but McDonald's were open. And so we're in a period now where those same industries are the ones being hit again. And so it poses the question about how much of this is just willful neglect by government, incompetence, but how much of this is by design? Yeah. If you look at some of the stuff that came out of COVID in terms of the restrictions combined with the response or lack of with the energy crisis, we're having governments that are, it seems to me, almost relaxed about so many different sectors and industries going under. And, you know, we're at the start of this, but when we get into the new year next year, when the prices are going to go up even higher, there's not going to be much left of many of the industries we've just talked about.
And I think Lewis made a really good point as well when he talked about the sanctions, because we saw it with lockdowns. When you questioned lockdowns, you were called a COVIDiot, name-called, a granny killer. When you question sanctions, you're a Putin sympathizer, a Russia apologist. And we're seeing, like with Gazprom, that you know, the sanctions aren't really hurting the Russian oligarchs or the Russian businesses or the energy prices there. They're hurting. They're coming back and hurting us now. Yeah. Just, you know, like Lewis said.
I think a lot of economists at the time as well that probably weren't on the payroll actually said, look, we're kind of shooting ourselves in the foot here. I mean, if someone provides my, you know, gas, you know, me putting a sanction on gas kind of that doesn't really make much sense really, because it's only me that, you know, that's going to affect, and that's what's happening. Do you think, Lewis, that this kind of, because obviously the Ukraine war is what this is being blamed on, and I think Biden's now he's pushing for another however many billion to be sent out there. I know obviously Boris Johnson sent another load of billions cash out there. He doesn't seem to give any receipts to Zelensky. I don't know what he's spending the money on. But do you think people are starting to kind of wake up to the Ukraine thing now, and actually that whole kind of waving a flag thing it's not got as much sort of traction behind it anymore?
Yeah, it's almost like the current thing has sort of moved on now. So it's a very, very interesting narrative because, like you mentioned, we don't 100% know where this money is going. I have a hunch, and there is a video that was posted by the Vice Prime Minister of Ukraine and the Minister of, I believe it's digital, the Minister of Digital Transformation, I believe he's called, where he posted a video outlining what Ukraine would look like in 2030, which displays various ideas, outlandish ideas that is just the playbook of the World Economic Forum. Things such as AI courts, e-health systems, and monitoring, along with everything's cashless, paperless. That's obviously the the current trend at the minute. And distance education, and everything is done by your smartphone. So it seems to me this is the idea of building back better, that they keep homing in this mantra upon everyone. So yeah, I think the narrative is crumbling because they're now being just way too open about it. And well, you're going to get people throwing buzzwords. You're a Putin sympathizer. You're a Russian apologist or a spy. And, you know, these are buzzwords. We've heard it with terms such as anti-vaxxer, racist, white supremacist, just to shut down criticism or anything that's just you asking questions. And this is what it's all about. They don't like you asking questions. When you see the bastion of democracy that is of Ukraine, and seeing journalists and reporters asking people on the street about the regime or what they think, they're locked up. And no free Western country, you'd like to think, would lock up journalists if they want to hold democracy to such a big platform. So, yeah, I think the narrative personally is crumbling, and we're starting to see this war for what it is.
I've seen lots of footage of people kind of sellotape to telegraph poles and stuff.
Yeah.
It's insane. Like, you know, anyone in Ukraine that maybe refuses to stop speaking Russian was getting strapped up.
I think, yeah, no, I've seen that. And I've also seen the video that Lewis mentioned as well. You know, this whole new world for Ukraine of everything being very tech oriented. So, yeah.
It's a frightening sort of future that they're trying to sort of put on us. They give us a lot of choice in it. Kezia, you mentioned earlier, you were talking about how they want people on dating apps. So it's kind of like, you know, you take away that, I guess, that natural thing where you're kind of just having a conversation. And I think part of how they did that was with the toxic masculinity. Yeah. Where, you know, I mean, I'm a married guy, so it doesn't affect me, but I know friends that were single that were like, do I offer to buy a woman a drink? Do I, like, I don't know what the rules are anymore. And so people then kind of went to dating apps instead, because well, I'm safe here. They can say no from a distance. I can't be accused of anything, sort of thing.
Right.
But do you think, you know, like the technology of dating apps and stuff like that was almost brought in to get people used to it, in the sense of, you know, it serves a nice purpose. So actually, will move people onto that, and so people just get used to it. Like say with a sat nav serves a great purpose, but actually you're just being tracked all the time if you actually think about it on a deeper level. Did you think then that these explosion of dating apps was intentional?
I'm not sure it was intentional, but I think that definitely they've looked at how much it can benefit these large corporations using these apps, and as you said, to monitor people. I found it very interesting, just going back to what Lewis mentioned about how a lot of he mentioned that the schools in 2030 were going to be online, through online education, online teaching. And I think that, you know, just talking about recently this cost of living crisis, they said that the schools might be 3 day a week, the schools. And I went and checked to find out back in 1970, when they really did have 3 days a week, the schools remained open throughout. Schools were always a priority. And that's what's really frightening, is that, you know, throughout this whole nonsense, you know, through COVID, I was speaking out about schools and children. That was my main, issue, was what was happening to children as a result of adult madness. And I can really see that happening. I can see children learning online in their houses, getting fat, looking at iPads in the future. I think that's a real possibility, and that's frightening. If people are meeting other people just through looking through dating apps now, and they're not even talking to other people, there will soon be nowhere to meet people. As I said, I really believe that this is to destroy small businesses. I believe that they're going to bring out like a furlough kind of style kind of thing for people, just to keep them going, but not enough for the businesses, especially the small businesses, to keep going. And then at the end of it, there's going to just be no small businesses left. There's going to be nowhere to meet people. So what do? They're going to go on apps. And I think it's going to be something similar with the schools. It's really frightening. It's dystopian. It's very worrying, but I can see it happening.
The war on kids terrifies me.
I know, absolutely. And you think that if they can't go to school where school is warm, there's a lot of kids that are happy to leave their house because they have a freezing cold house, they were, you know, I've known people who say, as a child, my parents couldn't afford to heat my house. I looked forward to going to school. Well, what's that going to be like this winter if people can't afford their energy bills and then they can't even send their kids to school?
Exactly, yeah. My wife, Gemma, was a teacher, and she said that when lockdown started, these kids were so vulnerable that actually school was their release. They came in, they got a hot meal, they were in the warm all day, and also they were, you know, I don't agree with the state monitoring, but at the same time, you know, some households are not safe places for kids to be. And so, you know, teachers could monitor the kids, and, you know, you could see if there's bruises appearing or whatever, that kind of thing, which they didn't have. And so lots of kids kind of, you know, just fell off the radar almost. And like Kezia said, that does worry me. I mean, it was my daughter's first day at school today, so I took her in. I'm just terrified by it. So the whole suggestion of this frightens me. When we're talking about this kind of these apps and this control, like with dating apps, they've got all your information, and also with all the other apps, they know everything about you. They know where you are. You check in at a certain place, and you know everyone can watch it. It's funny that you wouldn't want to be followed by your government, but they don't need to follow you anymore because you tell everyone on Facebook where you are anyway. Obviously, part of that whole app revolution is cash, because there's no cash obviously on an app. So everything is digital. And now, obviously, as you said in the headlines, you know, within 5 years, it's
they seem to be talking about it now as though, you know, this conspiracy theory that we all had is now coming true, and now there's headlines, and people don't seem to take on board what that actually means. Like every single penny that we spend, a proportion is now going to go to Visa, MasterCard, American Express. It's not all kept within our own pockets. It's more out of small businesses' pockets, more out of our own, you know, the consumers' pockets, and into these big corporation pockets. I think Kezia mentioned, you know, a furlough type scheme, which I think sounds similar to, you know, your universal basic income. You know, and with that, are we going to then be stuck with social credit, which is already coming in with, you know, the way you get banned for talking about things. Anyhow.
But there'll be, nothing comes for free. So if the state's going to give you money, then you're going to have to tick compliance boxes to get it. In terms of cash, how is it in, because I keep going on about the fact that you've been traveling a lot, Lewis. I only say that because most of us haven't. But mind you, you've been traveling a bit, haven't you? I haven't. I've been stuck in England the whole time. But do people still use cash in Europe? Because here, when you talk about cashless, most people are kind of quite apathetic towards it. The attitude is like, well, I don't really use it anyway, so it doesn't really matter.
I think if you go to the cities, it's very much almost cashless there. Like, for example, Amsterdam and Rotterdam. I think they're very similar with that. I think because it's under this guise of, oh, it's convenient, it's easy, you don't need to carry around loads of coins and notes, and, you know, people can just flash a card and just tap away and you're done. But it's the consequences of that in the future. For example, the programmable currency that Rishi Sunak has mentioned at the G7, where, you know, if the state doesn't like what you purchase, or they don't like you for what you speak about, if you go against the government, they can manipulate your transactions, stop you from even spending if they wanted to. I mean, we saw this happen over in Canada with the truckers and freezing of bank accounts. But yeah, I think in Europe, I think it's a very similar playbook is what I've seen. It's very similar in a sense that I think everyone loves the idea of, oh, it's, you know, we're having tough times at the minute. We've had a horrible 2-3 years of lockdowns and a pandemic, and, you know, a war is on, and we just want a convenient, nice, easy life going forward. And yeah, I think people are so susceptible to that, and would quite happily give up their cash if they wanted to. I think, and it's quite sad to really see, but I think it is a similar story over in Europe. Is I think my point.
Kezia, what's your experience when you talk to friends or family members about cash? Because I have conversations with people, and like I say, my experience is actually some people that are even what you call, I don't like the term awake, but you get my point, that have kind of seen through quite a lot of stuff, are still quite not really bothered. I've not used cash for 2 years, so it doesn't really affect me, sort of thing. So what are people saying to you?
Just to go back, I had a bit of a different experience to Lewis. I went to Croatia, I just came back, and they are very heavy on cash. But They're not part of the EU, I believe. Is that correct?
Hmm.
They're not part of the Euro.
I need to check that.
I don't think they are. They don't have euros. I know that, and I'm sure that they want to be part of the EU. They don't, but maybe there's a link there. Maybe it's countries that are within the EU, which would be quite interesting. That would be quite telling, actually. Back to your question. Yeah, most people I know just, again, they want that easy life. That's what I keep hearing. It's like, oh, just use a card, just use your watch to pay for things. It's going back to that sort of like, we've had exactly what Lewis said. We've had this 2 years. Who cares if we don't have cash anymore? People are pacified now. People are sedated. They're not worried about these kind of things. They just want to have that easy life and sort of, have a positive outlook rather than actually looking at the situation more, objectively. But another thing about being in a cashless society, which is very worrying, is that cash helps ration spending. If you spend cash, they've shown that people spend a lot less. Buying on plastic doesn't, have the same psychological effect. Again, that's another thing that help people spend more and more until they have nothing. So that's another point that I've noticed people aren't really talking about, psychological effect.
No, that's a good point. I hadn't even thought that. I remember the old days, you'd have a certain amount of money in your wallet, and when that was done, I used to tuck a fiver in one of the pockets for a kebab on the way home. When that was done, I know I had my fiver for the kebab and I go, but now, boop, boop. And there's sometimes you can wake up in the morning and look at your online banking and go, oh God, what have I done?
Yeah, you don't know what you've been spending. It's very true. It's so easy, isn't it, when you just you're tapping around, not to, be adding it up in your head as you go along. When you see your cash, little wad disappearing. I might have to spend a bit less here.
Exactly. Yeah, it's so easy to do that. And it's interesting, you were saying about people they don't seem to, people are kind of quite easily programmed now, and they just kind of almost just want to go back to some sort of normality. And I think an example of that I saw recently was fuel prices. So fuel prices in my village were maybe like £1.30 or whatever a litre, and it went up to £2. And then it came back down slightly, and I overheard a conversation where someone was saying, "Oh yeah, it's only £1.78. Oh, sorted. That's great, isn't it?" And I'm thinking, but hang on, it was £1.50.
I just had that because I was complaining about the price of diesel to pull my horses in a horse box. First world problems and all. But someone said to me, "Oh no, it's gone down." I'm thinking, hold on a minute, it's only gone down 20p, but it was up 70.
Yeah.
It's not anywhere close to near where it was.
No.
So yeah, you're right. I think people see it's kind of with lockdown, isn't it? It goes really extreme, and then you get this little bit of freedom back, and people are like, "Yay, we've got it back!" It's like the petrol; it's gone right up, little bit down, and people are celebrating a 20p drop. It's still up 50p.
Exactly. It was like that in lockdown. I remember seeing people that would go to the pub and they'll go, "Look, I don't know why you're still protesting, because we can go to the pub now." And it's like, yeah, you can go in. You have to sit outside. If you want to go in for a wee, you got to put a mask on. That's not normal. No. That's not, but they just kind of accept it. James, in terms of cash, what do you think people can do? Because obviously we're having a conversation. We're kind of quite accepting of the fact that actually it's a bit of a risk. At least at the moment, when you've got cash, if computer says no, oh okay, I've still got cash, I can pay. What do you think we can do to kind of try and wake people up a little bit to the fact that actually it's a risk to get rid of cash?
I tell you, the biggest risk is the people who are not online. I mean, you've got millions of elderly who are not online. They rely on the cash supply, circular economies, local businesses need it as well in a lot of cases. But there's millions of people who aren't online. I mean, I was reading the other day in my neck of the woods down in the southwest, the Scilly Isles had one bank that was remaining open. I think it was Lloyd's, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think it was Lloyd's. But it recently shut. And so the nearest bank was in Penzance. The only way we can get there is by plane or ferry journey. And considering that both of those options are closed over the winter, what do? And there's an elderly population out there. And it's been largely ignored. And I think it comes back to the COVID thing. It was interesting what everyone was saying there about sort of control, fear. Then you create a problem, you create a reaction, you get to a solution, and then you get to compliance. And I think that's what's happened. I think a lot of people are either getting led in the wrong direction, they've been brainwashed into fear, they have they've conformed. And then when you get the illusion of freedom, but at the same time taking away real freedoms to give that illusion, people end up complying. It's like almost enjoy your servitude. I think cash is one of those components. It goes back to, it's convenient to use, digital form. It's easier to spend, as you've all touched on. But what about the people who don't have that option? What about the elderly? I've got elderly friends and family who basically rely on cash payments. What's the structure going to be for them? And that's the problem with a lot of these solutions right now. You can have an argument about net zero solutions, the same thing. The solutions often create a multitude of other problems. They become crass logic. They become false economy. And a cashless society may well be one of those examples.
That's a really good point about the elderly. It's funny though, because we were told we needed to protect the elderly while they were being stuck in care homes and injected with all sorts. And then it comes to cash, and it's like, we look after our old people, or we need to protect homeless people. And I always think with cashless, how are you giving money to homeless people?
Right. And you know a similar thing happened in my post office. I lived in a little village. There's a couple of local post office. All the old people would come in, they'd get their cash out, they'd spend the cash. The lady who's the postmistress actually had to close it down because she said she'd lose money. People would come in, they'd buy the newspaper, try and shove it on a card, buy a packet of chewing gum, a packet of crisps on the card. Right. And people just forget those transaction fees. So, if you're buying something for 100 quid, 200 quid, you're paying 10p, you're still paying like a percentage, but the minimum 10p of transaction. On a packet of gum or a packet of crisps, you're losing all of your profit.
The whole profit margin goes,
it's hard, and so because of that, you're seeing a lot of post offices closing down, and old people can't get their pensions out. So they don't want to use computer. They don't want, they don't have emails. How are they going to have an online bank account?
Exactly.
Or they just don't want to do it.
That's insane about the silly hours as well. The fact that you're trapped out there. It's interesting as well with the apps, because it's a similar thing with the apps. Like there's an Indian restaurant that I would order at quite a lot. And they ended up contacting me actually and saying, you're using Just Eat, but you're a regular. Would you mind using our website or phoning up because of that percentage that Just Eat takes? And I've had a similar situation with a hotel where me and Gemma went away for a weekend and booked it on booking.com because it was easier because I didn't know the area of Lake District. So I kind of just went off there. And they said to us when we left, if you ever come back, please can you contact us directly, because booking.com take a fat cut as well.
And you know what, I'm about to start an Airbnb, and Airbnb take about between £30 and £50 a night on a transaction fee, so that might be one.
That's insane.
I should say that to my customers, shouldn't I?
Just come directly to me.
You've got these huge apps and you're paying, but you're not seeing where these hidden charges are that the apps are all taking.
It's ridiculous. In a total, well, it's still just as ridiculous, but I don't know if any of you saw Biden's speech. Now, when I saw it, I must admit my first reaction, like most things with Biden, is like, what is going on? And then I kind of laughed a little bit because of the ridiculousness of it. And then I saw some comments on social media from Jewish people that were saying, actually, this makes my like hairs on my neck stand up because of what it's almost comparable to. Did any of you watch the speech and have the similar kind of thoughts of actually like this is dark?
Kezia.
Yeah, I mean, I thought the optics were terrible. Whatever was going through the minds of the people who designed that and the people who commissioned that, it doesn't take much to work out some of the optic problems of our history, like anything else. I thought it was disturbing. I thought the content was disturbing. And I think, I think a lot of Democrats, if they're really honest themselves, they know in their hearts that Joe Biden isn't up to this. It's the last couple of years have been appalling on so many different ways, but that was almost a snapshot. And I don't think you'll be able to get away from that particular imagery. I mean, it looked like, at best, something out of V for Vendetta, but at worst, some of the horrific optics and imagery from many, many years ago. I don't know what people were thinking. Simple thing, even if you're sort of a floating voter and you have a passing interest in politics, you would look at that and think, even if you don't know the backstory of such optics, you would still look at that and think it's somewhat sinister.
Absolutely. Kezia, his so-called selling point when Biden came in was that he was going to unify the country. and then has since then gone on basically just a rampage to kind of vilify and ostracise 50% of the country. Do you agree with James in the sense that actually Democrat voters are actually probably kind of starting to see through this themselves?
It was such a divisive speech. It was horrible. It was negative. I was like, it was late at night. I wasn't even expecting it to come on. It was just late, and I said, suddenly it came on. I said, "What is this? It's like so divisive." And I have friends in America who are Democrats. They support the Democrat Party, and they're blind. They're still standing up for him. I was like, you have a leader that reads the whole auto cue. He reads like stop, start, new line. Clearly, he's lost his marbles, and they defend him. They go, well, he's better than Trump, and they just start attacking Trump. That's the way that they actually defend Biden, is by attacking Trump and Trump supporters. I'm like, but let's just take, like, Biden was actually talking about freedoms. I was like, in the speech, he was talking about freedoms and living in like, a democratic society. And I was like, but you were forcing people to take vaccines or lose their jobs. You're not allowing healthy people come into your country who are not vaccinated still unless they quarantine. This doesn't sound like the land of the free anymore. But honestly, I have very little hope because, as I said, I have friends who are Democrats and they still will defend him by, again, attacking Trump.
It feels to me like that's why Trump's there.
Yeah.
He's perfect, isn't he? Just to polarise.
Absolutely.
It's mad. Lewis, what do you think in terms of this? Because part of me, I am a serial optimist. So part of me thinks that, the worse it gets with Biden, that actually that he actually might inadvertently kind of unite people in a way, because there will be, obviously there are Democrats, like Kezia says, that are just basically anyone but Trump. But there are others that are not that way, and that actually are kind of can look with 20/20 vision a bit and just say, actually, this is dark, and maybe that might kind of bring people together a little bit.
Yeah, I like to try and stay optimistic as well. I mean, what's going on in the US is extremely quite polarizing and strange because of one man. So it's interesting with that speech because he mentioned nothing about the border crisis. He mentioned nothing about their cost of lockdown or their energy crisis or anything that's going across the talking points about America currently. And all he done was just talk about the Make America Great Again movement and saying and vilifying and saying they're attacking democracy and and there's many things you can pick apart in terms of using them as an example when the Democrats haven't exactly been very, very truthful in the past however many years. But it's very interesting to watch. I think I echo everyone's views here to say that the optics were extremely bad with the aesthetics and how it looked, and it didn't paint a very sort of coming together image, because like you said, Gareth, he wanted to unify the country, which nearly every person who steps into power likes to say that, because that's the first thing they try and say, because they know how polarized America is with their politics. If you're if you're not a Democrat, then you're a far right fascist. If you're not a Republican, you must be a communist. That's how it sort of is over there. And whereas over here, I see a lot of overlap with politics and viewpoints, economics, social conservatism, whatever it may be. So I think America needs to really sort of hit the home ground and go, do you know what? This isn't right. Be honest with what you're seeing. Don't just say, oh, but I don't want Trump to get into power. Whether you love him or hate him is actually irrelevant. It's actually all about policy and what you're bringing to the table. In my view, I don't mind Trump, and I'm quite open with that. I actually don't mind Trump as much. So I think people need to sort of get this idea out of their head that that just because their guy how they frame it. Their guy is not up to it. Doesn't mean to say that there might be someone else out there that would bring better policies to the table. And I think that's what America needs to sort of snap out of and get to grips with.
It's very tribal, America.
Yes.
Crazy tribal. Yeah. I mean, I got a message from a friend who was anti-lockdown, anti-mask, anti-vax throughout it, but wasn't vocalizing that, and actually said that they wore a mask because they were a Democrat, and if they didn't wear a mask, they would be labelled a Trump supporter.
Oh, that's absolutely true. My fiance told a couple of his friends that I refused to wear masks, refused to lock down, and they said, she's Trumper. So it's like, I was just, my politics has always kind of been in the middle, maybe sometimes I'm more a little left, sometimes I'm more a little right. But the loyalty they have with a particular person and a particular party, and they must follow every single thing that party agrees with, it blows my mind, and it's pretty scary. And that speech, by the way, I saw like the memes going around, and I thought the background was photoshopped in to kind of highlight what his speech was saying. I didn't realise that was the actual
thing,
background, and that didn't happen by accident. There is no way a president gets up on stage and speaks, and the lighting behind him and the optics are an accident. That's all planned,
of course.
And that's what's pretty frightening about the whole lot of it.
Their marketing team would be one of the best around. They'd know what they were doing. And to show just how bad it was, the fact that CNN then edited the lighting so it didn't look so bad. So they must have acknowledged the fact that actually we need to support this guy, but actually this doesn't look good.
Yeah.
Which is crazy. It seems to me that they kind of fear Trump at the minute.
I think so, because I don't think I think there's some Democrats that don't want to admit it to their friends, a bit like your friend who wore a mask so she wasn't ostracized by her group, that are kind of thinking, Biden's pretty shocking and this is not good. This is not a good look for...
No. I mean, they've gone along with the tribal attitude of, if Trump said it was a sunny day and you looked out and the sun was shining, you'd have to say it was raining.
Yeah.
And that doesn't work over a 4-year term, especially with stuff that Biden's doing.
So he's not getting any better, is he? So
no, he's not. No, and
they're going to have to wake up a bit.
Absolutely, as Kezia said as well, the fact that he's reading out lots of the auto cue, including pause for effect and things like that.
I've managed not to do that on my first day.
Oh, absolutely, yeah. That's it. That's all for this week. Thanks for tuning in.
Thank you to James, Lewis, and Kezia. We'll see you next time.
Good night.
Good night.